Today we're going to talk about how to add content restrictions on your child's iPhone or iPad. We'll start by opening up our settings, scrolling down to screen time, and we're going to turn screen time on. All app controls and usage are monitored and captured in screen time. So we have to turn this on before we can set up any limitations with apps, downtime, and content restrictions. We're going to hit continue. So on this screen, you're going to want to say this is my child's phone. And what this is going to allow you to do as a parent, it will allow you to create a passcode so that way they can't simply turn off the content restrictions. We're going to come back to downtime later, as well as app limits and content restrictions. We'll come back to that later. So here it's going to ask you to place to create a screen time passcode. So in my example, it was 1111. We're going to re-enter it. Obviously, you want to pick something that your children don't know. And here, this is where you are going to enter your Apple ID, the parent's Apple ID, not the same Apple ID tied to the phone or the iPad. This is a different one, because if you need to turn off or make any changes to screen time, you're going to need to punch in the passcode. And if you forget the passcode, there's a prompt for a passcode recovery, and you wouldn't want your children to do that on your behalf and get your passcode and essentially turn it off. So here's where you plug in your Apple ID. You would then plug in your password on the next screen to set that up. If you don't have an Apple ID, you can create one for free at iCloud.com, and in the bottom left-hand corner, you will see Create Apple ID. So here in screen time, we have it turned on now. You can see activity from week to week or day to day. You can view what your child is accessing, which apps they're using and how often they're using them. So you can click through these days. You can scroll down. You can see the specific apps that are used the most. You can see how many times or which app was used when they first pick up the phone. For instance, messages or Safari or whatever it might be. And you can go scroll through your days here on top, or you can click by the week. So we're going to hit back. So the first feature we're going to talk about is downtime. So when you turn downtime on, it allows you to essentially render the phone and most of its apps useless during a certain time period. So by default, it's set to every day and from 10 p.m. until 7 a.m. So if you don't want your child to use the phone during certain periods of time, you can set this up. Frankly, once they're getting ready for bed, you can always just put the phone away, keep it up high. But for whatever reason, if the child needs to have the phone with them in the room for alarm purposes or whatever, you can set up downtime so that way they wouldn't be able to access certain apps while downtime is turned on. So we'll go ahead and just turn that off. Go back to the main menu, app limits. So here is where you can set time restraints to specific apps. All the apps are categorized in the categories listed below. So what you could do is you could click on a handful of apps, games, entertainment, whatever it might be. For example purposes, let's pick on Facebook, and then we'll hit next. And then you can say, okay, Facebook, or if you had many apps in here, it'd be listed. You can say, only 1 hour a day. So when the child hits this limit, it'll give them a message, and then they will not be able to use the app for the rest of the day. You can customize days, give them more time or less time on certain days, whatever. So you just hit add, and then that's that would be in effect. And if you need to make the change, you can click it again, and you can click delete limit. And again, if you have your passcode turned on, I turn mine off for demonstration purposes, because anytime you make a change to these settings, it asks you to punch that pin in. So I turned it off for the video here. So that's app limits. Always allowed. So let's say you do have downtime turned on, and if you wanted the child to use certain apps during that downtime, for whatever reason, here Among Us and YouTube are turned on. So if you wanted, Bible, you can click that and put that up there, or just get rid of Among Us. YouTube, we can get rid of that. So now, when the downtime is turned on, they would be able to use the apps listed here: Messages, FaceTime, Maps, Bible. You can customize this as you see fit. So content and privacy restrictions. If you want your child to, if you want to restrict them from downloading apps, you would go into the iTunes and App Store purchases and just turn off installing apps. The downside to this is that anytime an app on their phone needs to be updated, you need to turn installing apps back on, which means you got to get the phone, put the passcode in, go to the App Store, get the updates, or download whatever new app you want them to have. And then go back into the settings and turn this off, because when you have the setting don't allow for installing apps, it removes the App Store from their phone completely. So a better way might be to make it so they can't delete apps. So if you don't want them to, depending on your how the age of your child, right? You can say, hey, I don't want you using these particular apps, right? Myself, I strongly dislike TikTok and Snapchat, right? So you can say, I don't want you downloading these apps. And if they do download them, behind your back, they will not be able to delete them from the phone. So when you're doing your daily or weekly check, since they can't delete it, it's going to be there, and you're going to see it, and then you can talk about it. You can use it as a teaching point. But if you want to restrict installing apps completely, you can do that as well. So these are allowed apps. These are all apps that are integrated with the iOS system. So there's not really too much to do here, because these aren't downloaded apps. These are apps that already came with your phone. But if you wanted to turn them off, if you didn't want them to use FaceTime or AirDrop, right, you can turn those off here. Content restrictions. So the content that you're restricting are only going to be for the integrated iOS apps, such as the Apple TV, Apple Music, Safari, things like that. So by turning these settings on for PG-13 only, or TV shows PG, right? These are only going to be restricted in the specific Apple apps. It won't work in Netflix and Hulu. Those will have their own content restrictions. But what you can do is you can go through these individually. Music, you can say clean versions of songs only. You can turn off music videos if you like. You set your ratings for your movies, TV shows, books, apps. Here you can set age limits on which apps your child can have access to. For instance, YouTube is rated 17 plus, so if you did not want them to access YouTube, the YouTube app, you can dial it down and click 12 plus. Hulu and Netflix, for instance, are rated 12 plus. So if you didn't want them to access those apps, you could dial it down to 9. And what this does is this makes it so if those apps are on their phones, it hides it from them, so they aren't able to open it. And also, if they try to search for it in the App Store, it will not allow them to download it. So web content. So under web content, you can have unrestricted access, limit adult websites, which automatically filters out what Apple knows to be adult websites, or allowed websites only. Allowed websites only will make it so only the websites listed here below will work with Safari, and you can add your own website. It is, I do want to point out that if your child uses Google Chrome or some other browser, they would still have unrestricted access to all those websites. So the restrictions in the settings here are only for the Safari browser. But if you make it, if you go back to the settings, because Google Chrome, for instance, is I think a 17 plus rating. If you have your age restrictions at 12 plus, they won't be able to download or use Google Chrome. So that way you can ensure that the restrictions that you set are going to be followed, because they can only use Safari. Now, what you could do is you can add always allowed to the list, or you can add never allow. Let's say you don't want your kids going to a specific website or specific websites. You can add that here. For instance, if you didn't want your child to access the YouTube app, you're going to want to add the YouTube website in here too, because they would be able to just access the YouTube website straight from their phone without needing the app. So if you add this, when they try to go to youtube.com on Safari, they're going to get an error. It's not going to let them go through. So some more things. You can add or turn off our web search content for Siri. Some game center settings on here. You can go through and play with those settings if you'd like. Some more privacy settings down here on the bottom. If you don't want your child to change the passcode on their phone, you can turn this to don't allow. So this way they won't be allowed to change the passcode when they try to open their phone. Okay. And then on the main screen time menu, if you have share across devices turned on, this will enable all the settings that you just set up. It will turn those settings on for any other iPhone or iPad that particular Apple ID is assigned to. So say, for instance, your child has an iPhone and they have an iPad. If you have share across devices, this will turn on the same settings. I hope you find this tutorial useful. Please let me know if you have any questions.